Fellas, I got tons of tight end goodies to share with y'all. Today, we're going to break down one of the most difficult positions to crack the code on in fantasy football, and this is part 2 of the Finding the Next League Winning series. I already did the quarterback position last Monday. Of course, we're saving running backs and wide receivers for when everyone's coming back to the scene in fantasy football. But without further ado, let's get right into it. Today, we're tackling tight end strategy. We're going over how you should handle the tight end position in drafts. Should you be in on the early round guys, the mid round guys, the late round guys? Should you punt the position entirely? I'm going to be talking from a redraft frame of mind primarily, but I will sprinkle in some best ball stuff, maybe even a dynasty take or two. League winning tight ends basically have two definitions for me, and they probably should have the same two definitions for you as well. A league-winning tight end could be a guy that you drafted, let's say semi-early, a top 10 tight end in ADP, who produces a monster win rate, a high-end season of 14-plus PPR points per game. The reason I choose 14 is because that's about a top 3 season in tight end finish every single year. And then the other definition of a league-winning tight end for me is a guy that you picked up late, picked up off the waiver wire, whatever the case is, who becomes a solidified set-it-and-forget-it tight end. Because you guys know me, I don't like spending up at this position. I like bargain hunting. I don't like investing into early round tight ends usually, because unless they crush, unless they are by far and away the best pick on the board, positional advantages, you can swing and miss on these guys if they're just okay. Because if you think about it from a raw point per game perspective, if you swing on a tight end in round 4 and he only produces 12 PPR points per game, well, there's a good chance you were going to get more than 12 PPR points per game from the running backs and wide receivers in that area. If you think about it last year, the guys that were going high, Sam LaPorta, not worth the draft capital. Travis Kelce, not worth the draft capital. Trey McBride, definitely worth the draft capital. Mark Andrews, kind of not worth the draft capital, especially at the beginning of the year. Dalton Kincaid and Kyle Pitts. Those were the top 6 tight ends off the board in ADP. And other than Trey McBride, really, most of them disappointed. Even Travis Kelce, who was tight end 6 in points per game, was going way higher than you probably wanted him to finish at. Tight end 1 to 6 ADP, like I said, only one of them really crushed. The rest of them kind of were silent killers for you. And the other 2 were just kind of big old busts with Kyle Pitts and Dalton Kincaid. So you can absolutely get usable production at this position later on in drafts. 30 of 51 top 3 scoring weeks, 3 times 17 at tight end, were from non-top 8 drafted tight ends in ADP. So usually you're seeing a lot of variance at this position. And if you think about it again, a big hit at tight end is like 13, 15, maybe 16 or 17 PPR points per game in non-tight end premium formats. Whereas a big hit at quarterback is like 22 points per game in this same range of the draft. A big hit at running back or wide receiver is an 18, 20 point per game score. And you win your fantasy matchup simply by outscoring your opponent. You do not win your fantasy matchup by having more points than his tight end because you have the scarcer position. You just simply win your matchups based on who scores the most points. So to me, it makes more sense to swing on an early quarterback this year if you're going to go in that round 3-4 area to take an Allen, to take a Jackson, take a Daniels, take a Hurts, rather than take an early round tight end. That being said, the shallower your league is, the better elite tight ends are going to be because it's easier to get wide receivers and running backs and quarterbacks later. And in best ball formats where you can't trade, you can't stream the position, it is more important to hit on the tight end position and give you those spike week producers as well. But even still, I built out a ton of 3 tight end best ball cores last year of like David Njoku, Jonnu Smith, K. Doughton. And those 3 stack of tight ends would have probably been more valuable given the capital that you spent on them and the point production that they had ping-ponging variance weeks, as opposed to just having like a Trey McBride or having a Brock Bowers because you had to spend such a high pick to get somebody like that. So let's examine the last 35 tight ends who have been league winners. There has been 35 of them, like I said, since 2013. Those guys are 14 plus PPR point per game scores and had played at least 12 games. Like I said, 14, the reason I chose that is because on average, a top 3 season in tight end point per game finishes in PPR is usually about 14 points per game. These guys were truly set it and forget it guys that you just did not have to worry about. You had an advantage over your league mates, and the 3 guys, no surprise, that did it last year: George Kittle, Brock Bowers, and Trey McBride. Doing it in a little bit of different ways. George Kittle, obviously very efficient on the yardage total, not as many targets as Bowers and McBride. And of course, McBride and Bowers not really scoring a whole lot of touchdowns, but sometimes we do see tight ends who get there on the back of 11, 12, 13 receiving touchdowns. This past year, like I said, Bowers, Kittle, and McBride were the gold standard at tight end, all of them scoring over 14 points per game. When you look at these 35 tight ends and you work your way backwards to what kind of volume were they receiving, you can see it was about 8 targets per game, 5.5 receptions per game, and about 8-9 touchdowns on the season. Those were the averages from a volume perspective to reach a season like this. Tight ends don't need as many targets as wide receivers to be big-time positional advantages, but you do want to see them at least probably be the number 2 target, if not the number 1 target on their offense, with big time touchdown upside. The screenshot is too big to show you all the situational factors that I tested, but basically the same 35 tight ends going back to 2013, guys that had 14 fantasy points per game. We look at situational factors as well. How good of an offense were they on? How good was their quarterback ranking QBR? All of the stuff that I tested, some of it's pretty common sense, pass volume, their own individual abilities as tight end, and I measured that by yards per route run. Most people would know to look at that stuff for the tight end position, but the stuff that's a little bit less clear is rank and team targets. Like I said, generally, you want your tight end to have if they want to have that league-winning upside, to be the number 1 or to be the number 2 on their offense. If you think of Kittle, if you think of McBride, you think of Bowers last year. Kittle was the number 2 in targets behind Juwan Jennings, and Bowers and McBride were the number 1 in targets in their offense. Rank and receiving touchdowns, only 2 of the last 35 tight ends that have been league winners were not at least first or second on their team in touchdowns. Trey McBride actually this past year being one of those, because we know he ran notoriously cold on touchdowns. And then usage stuff is also very underrated as well, because I think a lot of times people just assume, oh, this guy's a talented tight end. He's going to get the routes. He's going to get the reps. He's going to be used properly. And as we know from like Kyle Pitts types, that isn't always the case. Sub 70% route participation is something that you never want to be as a tight end, because you're not going to have that league winning upside. Only 4 of those 35 tight ends had sub 70% route participation, and they were just touchdown monsters. Most of them, Jordan Reed, Tyler Eifert, and Julius Thomas were those guys. And ideally, too, we want to not have inline tight ends, because if you think about it, if you're an inline tight end, you're usually blocking more often than not. We essentially want guys to be used as like big slot wide receivers who can even play on the outside a little bit as well. Only 8 of the 35 tight ends in this sample played more than 50% of their routes in line. If you think of guys like George Kittle, who's a complete anomaly and actually made up 4 of the 8 names, or the 4 of the 8 occurrences where somebody played more than 50% of their routes in line, he's just so good that it doesn't matter. But generally, he would be a lot better for fantasy if he was used as a slot receiver. TJ Hockenson, also same thing. And then some of those touchdown merchants as well, even though they were inline tight ends, they caught 12, 13 touchdowns and it didn't really matter. Typically, those league winning ceilings are going to come from like 1 of 3 paths. You're going to get that premier target potential like Bowers, like McBride this past year. You're going to get that premier touchdown potential like we've seen from Sam LaPorta as a rookie, Mark Andrews in years past, Jimmy Graham types in years past, or you're going to get a combination of the two, which is how you get the Travis Kelce, the Rob Gronkowski type of years. Or your name is George Kittle and you're just not going to get the targets or the touchdowns, but you're freakishly efficient at racking up yardage on lower volume. So those are basically the paths in which somebody can take to be one of these league-winning tight ends. Now what we're going to do here is take a look at the 2025 tight ends in order of underdog ADP. We're going to go 8 at a time and basically just highlight what are their deficiencies, what marks are they hitting? Are they hitting the volume? Are they hitting the situational stuff? And basically, we're going to form our entire tight end strategy this season based on the findings of this exercise, in addition to, you know, all the drafts I've done on Underdog and mock drafts and how we like our teams when we go early tight end, or do we like our teams when we go mid-round tight end, or do we like our teams going late-round tight end? Because all of these positions work in unison, right? If it's it's of course going to be beneficial to you to get an early round quarterback, an early round running back, an early round wide receiver, early round tight end, and get the positional advantages everywhere. But that's not possible. You only have so many draft picks. So you got to kind of pick your spots. Where are you going to spend these picks? And we'll talk about the tight end position here. And then, of course, I talked about quarterbacks in last week's video, and I'll go through running backs and wide receivers in the next 2 Mondays. So which pockets of the draft are we targeting? Let's start with the early round guys. We have Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, George Kittle, Sam LaPorta, TJ Hockenson, Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, and Evan Engram. These are the top 8 tight ends off the board in underdog ADP. Brock Bowers, who goes in the middle of round 2, he is the first tight end off the board. He checks literally every single box because he's so freaking good. He was absolutely dominant as a rookie last year. But I do want to point out a couple of things, two specifically with Brock Bowers. The Raiders threw at the 4th highest rate in the NFL last year, and I don't think that'll continue with Chip Kelly and Pete Carroll coming in, who are like boomer coaches who are going to want to run the football. Hell, they just took a running back at 6th overall. So the pass volume might go down for the Raiders. He also, Brock Bowers, averaged 13 targets a game in the 2 games in which Jacoby Myers was out and Devontae Adams was already traded off of the Raiders. So he did boost his numbers a little bit when it came to those 2 games. They were 2 of his best games of the year. And also, the Raiders offense, while improved with Geno Smith coming in and then the better coaching staff, also still projects for the 6th lowest points per game, according to Vegas. Vegas has all of the weeks 1 through 17 games projected. In implied point total, the Las Vegas Raiders are 6th lowest in the NFL. So I think conventional wisdom says that Brock Bowers is a beast. He's young. He can only get better. The ceiling is the roof kind of thing. And it absolutely is. But we also said this about Sam LaPorta last year and failed to recognize that there was ways in which he failed. And the one that came to fruition was that Jameson Williams took a huge step and he lost a lot of volume as a result of that. I do think it's possible that Brock Bowers is not the best pick on the board when you compare him to the wide receivers and running backs going off the board. He needs to smash the rest of the tight end position in order to pay off of that ADP. And I tend to think that him, Kittle, and McBride, the first 3 tight ends off the board, are very interchangeable, very similar. So I'll take the other 2 guys at cost because they go lower than where Brock Bowers goes. Starting again with Trey McBride, who goes off the board about the early 3rd round. Even if you wanted to factor in that, yes, Marvin Harrison Jr. is probably going to be better this year than he was last year, and he may even be the number 1 on the team in targets and touchdowns this season, have 1,400 yards, 10 touchdowns or something. To me, it still makes Trey McBride the better value of him and Brock Bowers. The Cardinals actually project for the 9th most points in the NFL. Again, when you go through and add up all the implied point totals, weeks 1 through 17, according to Vegas, they have all the information we have. They know everything that we know and probably more. The quarterback, Kyler Murray, also has more upside, I think, to smash rather than Geno Smith, who, even though he might be a safer passer, probably doesn't have in his range of outcomes to have like a 35, 40 touchdown season, whereas I think Kyler Murray still does have that in his range of outcomes. And the route participation, the usage is actually slightly better for McBride. He was running more routes. He was used a little bit more creatively, and he averaged more targets per game when he was healthy last year than Brock Bowers did. The only thing that you can really say about Trey McBride against him is, well, he only scored 2 touchdowns. It's like, okay, that was a historical outlier. That's probably never going to happen again, given the amount of volume he saw, because he absolutely would have lapped the field if he had scored his expected total of touchdowns based on his volume, which was like 8 or 9. His expected PPR points per game last year was 19.1, which, to give you an idea, was like 4 points per game more than he actually scored. And it's the most expected points per game from a tight end since 2020 Travis Kelce. You think of that 2022 Travis Kelce year when he lapped the field and was clearly the best tight end in fantasy. He was 2 expected fantasy points and actual fantasy points below what Trey McBride was expected last season if he had just gotten into the end zone a little bit more. So I think Trey McBride straight up is the better pick over Brock Bowers, given the offensive insulation and given the fact that I think the volume is going to correct itself. The Cardinals were also only 21st in pass attempts last year, and I think they could go up from there. So I actually really, really like Trey McBride. Both him and Bowers to me are like 2-3 turn picks, but I do actually have Trey McBride ranked 1 spot higher, and he's the one that I would prefer to deviate for if I'm going to take one early in the draft. George Kittle, the answer to me between Pearsall versus Jennings versus Ayuk when he comes back is just take George Kittle. It's an elite offense. It's an elite, efficiency quarterback in Brock Purdy. He was the tight end 1 in points per game last year, George Kittle, on not even 100 targets. Like, the guy's an absolute freak show. He led the league in yards per route run. He's still the best tight end on the planet, in my opinion. And the 2v2 of, say, taking George Kittle at the 404 where he goes and taking Brock Bowers at the 204 where you'll have to take him is that you get George Kittle and Drake London at the 204, or you get Devontae Smith and Brock Bowers at the 404 where you have to take him. And if you go with the running back position, you can go George Kittle, Devon Achane, or Brock Bowers, Amarian Hampton, James Cook, Alvin Kamara. To me, the 2v2 of taking Kittle instead of Bowers 2 rounds later is just way better for a guy that already outscored him last year and could get more target volume and projects very similarly yet again. So if you're taking anything away from my stance on this situation, it's a really sketchy stance because I know how good Brock Bowers is, but I'm kind of fading him at ADP because I think all of his upside is kind of priced into where he's currently going until he slides down a little bit more to the 2-3 turn. I'm probably not going to be drafting him a shit ton. Sam LaPorta, huge drop in ADP. Those first three guys are going round 2, round 3, and round 4. Sam LaPorta doesn't go off the board until early round 7, even though he's the tight end 4 in ADP right now. The target volume is a bit of a concern, especially with St. Brown commanding as much as he does and Jamison Williams taking a big step last year. When people start to see Sam LaPorta slide, I think it's still a great situation. He's still a talented guy. I'm still fine taking him. I just probably want him in that 7th round range where the wide receivers and running backs start to dry up a little bit. And let's say I've already drafted 2 running backs, 4 wide receivers, and I'm in a start 7 ESPN league or whatever. I'm okay taking Sam LaPorta at that point, but generally in home leagues, he's probably going to get pushed up the board and go more so in the 5th, 6th round because people are going to want to get their starting tight end and realize there's been a big drop off in ADP. But I actually agree with the underdog fantasy market in that there should be about a 30-40 pick discrepancy between Kittle and the next tight end off the board, whoever that is, given that I do think those top 3 tight ends project so much better than the rest of the position. TJ Hockenson doesn't go off the board also until about round 7, round 8. 2nd year removed from the ACL tear, tight end 2 in points per game last time we saw him fully healthy in 2023. But I'm currently kind of fading TJ Hockenson because A, he goes a lot higher in sleeper ADP than he goes on underdog. And B, JJ McCarthy's a rookie. We don't know what to expect from him there. How good is this offense really going to be? And of course, Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison are going to take away looks from TJ Hockenson. It's definitely worth a shot if you've been hammering wide receivers and running backs for 7 straight rounds and you want to take a tight end. But again, you got to take TJ Hockenson at like the 5-6 turn in home leagues. And I'm probably not going to be willing to take him that high. I'll probably bypass that area and I'll talk about my strategy in the next bucket of players as my preferred strategy of attacking the tight end position. Travis Kelce, round 8 to 9. Again, in home leagues, maybe he goes earlier. He's got that name value. He's old as hell, but he was still tight end 4 in expected fantasy points per game last year. He and Patrick Mahomes are basically mind melded. They're going to know exactly what the other one is thinking. As long as Travis Kelce is healthy, he can easily bounce his way back into a top 5 scoring tight end because his offense is expected to throw the most pass attempts in the league, not named the Cincinnati Bengals. The pace of play is there. Mahomes has better weapons to make the offense better. And the big problem for Kelce last year was actually that he only scored 3 touchdowns. If he scores 8-9 touchdowns last year, like he probably should have, given the workload and the volume that he had, he would have been just fine for fantasy. He would have been probably right up there with McBride, with Bowers, and with Kittle with like 14, 15 points a game. So I do think that that Travis Kelce in sharper leagues where people are going to fade him is actually not a bad pick, specifically on underdog. You can get a nice round 8, round 9 ADP on him. But in home leagues, people will see the name Travis Kelce and push him up to like the 4th, 5th round. So probably avoid him in that situation. I will say this tight end 4 to 6 range looks a little bit better to me. LaPorta, Hockenson, and Kittle and Kelce, after doing this exercise. But like I said, only on underdog am I really intrigued by these guys because I think in home leagues, they're going to go a lot higher because the wide receivers aren't nearly as pushed up the board. Mark Andrews and Evan Engram are the other 2 guys in this territory. I'm just not drafting them right now. It really comes down to the fact that I have Tyler Warren, David Njoku, Tucker Kraft, Colston, Loveland ranked straight up over those guys. And they go later, so why would I draft the guys who I think are worse projections? Plus, you have Mark Andrews, who's older, who's prone to injury, and has maybe an equally talented tight end behind him in Isaiah Likely, who has already impacted his route participation and could even continue to do so. So that's why I'm not really drafting Mark Andrews. He also probably regresses touchdown-wise. Evan Engram could absolutely be the number 2 receiver in Denver right now because other than Cortland Sutton, they don't have a whole lot there. But is Sean Payton going to force feed him inefficient, check down targets the way that Doug Peterson did when he was in Jacksonville, when he's clearly not an efficient player anymore and is clearly maybe a top 12 to 15 talent at the position at tight end in Evan Engram. And I think I'm kind of being generous there. I don't think he's like worthy of going tight end 8 other than the fact that people go, oh, he could be the number 2 here. And Bo Nix is a good quarterback. Again, he has that going for him. I just don't necessarily think that he has a super, super high ceiling. And I think he has a lot of downside risk because he also hasn't been able to stay healthy of late either. Let's get into the honeypot, which is what I didn't say about the tight end position last year. Last year, I came here and I said, get a top 11 guy or you're going to be screwed. Specifically, Jake Ferguson, Brock Bowers, and David Njoku were the very last of that tier in ADP last year. And I was like, make sure you get one of those guys, if not some of the early round guys. If you did take one of those top 11 tight ends last year, you probably did pretty well. But this year, I think there's about 5, 6, maybe even 7 or 8 more guys than 11 that I feel comfortable riding into the season with. I'm actually quite comfortable going into the season with a Tyler Warren, with a David Njoku, with a Tucker Kraft, with a Colston Loveland, with a Dalton Kincaid, Dallas Goedert, Isaiah Likely, or Jake Ferguson. I feel really good about this entire tier of tight ends. And more importantly, too, in round 11 to 13, where these guys go in ADP, you are not passing on high-end running back wide receiver projections. You are already presumably 4 or 5 deep at wide receiver, 3 or 4 deep at running back by the time these guys get on the board, which is why I think this is such a great honeypot off the ADP. Starting with Tyler Warren, who goes in round 11, the Colts spent a top 15 pick on this guy. And if you watch the War Room footage, it looks like they wanted him bad. And number one, he has no competition, absolutely no tight end on this roster is going to outsnap him, out-target him, run more routes than him. He's going to run 85% of the routes from the very first preseason game, legitimately, which is rare for a rookie tight end to do, but that's what we saw with Sam LaPorta as a rookie. That's what we saw with Brock Bowers as a rookie. He's the highest capital investment on this entire team. On the offensive skill position, you think of Downs, 3rd round pick, A.D. Mitchell, 2nd round pick, Alec Pierce, 2nd round pick. Michael Pittman has a nice contract, but relative to top 15 draft capital, it's probably less of an investment as well. So to me, I look at an extremely versatile guy who was really, really productive in college. That's how Bowers hit last year. Sheer volume, force feed your top 15 pick. If Daniel Jones starts, which I assume he will, the passing volume will actually be pretty solid, because if you look back in Shane Steichen's tenure as Indianapolis head coach, whenever Richardson is starting, they are extremely run heavy because they don't trust him. Whenever Daniel Jones, well, I guess Daniel Jones this year, but Gardner Minshew, Joe Flacco, some other quarterback was starting, they were actually like a top 12 team in neutral pass rates. So I do think that we're going to get a nice amount of volume with DJ starting, and Tyler Warren, whether it's DJ or Richardson or each of them starts half the season, is going to get manufactured looks, lots of targets, lots of opportunities to score touchdowns. That is why Tyler Warren is my highest drafted tight end on any platform. Underdog, dynasty, redraft, like I am hammering the crap out of this dude because I do think he is going to get a lot of volume this season. David Njoku, the next tight end off the board. When you pop the hood on his stats, you go, holy cow, tight end 4 in points per game last year when he was healthy. Even despite the Browns already being bad at offense last year, they project bad again. Like, I mean, one thing that people look at the Browns offense, they go, oh, they're going to be really bad this year. It's like, well, they were 31st in points per game last year. So it's not like they're going from really good to really bad. David Njoku can be the number 1 or number 2 target in this offense. Him and Judy will go back and forth, I would imagine, on any given week in targets, in touchdowns. I guess my one concern is, how does Harold Fannin impact David Njoku? Because he was a dynasty darling. They took him with a top 75 pick. And even if he's not 100% ready to play snaps right away, what if he drops David Njoku's route participation from 80% to 60%? That would be a huge problem for David Njoku. So that's the one concern I want to see kind of how it plays out in training camp in the preseason usage, because I want to be all in on David Njoku, but it is a bad offense and there is a guy nipping at his heels, 4 reps, 4 snaps, and 4 targets there. So I definitely want to see how that plays out. Tucker Kraft in round 11 also hasn't earned targets at a high level yet, but as a 3rd-year tight end, or entering his 3rd year, he was the best yards after catch tight end in the NFL last season, and he's a tremendous athlete. He can be the number 2-ish target on this offense, whether it's going to be Reed, Golden, or Kraft. It's going to be one of those 3 guys that leads the team in targets, leads the team in touchdowns. And I think Kraft can be like 3rd on the team targets, 2nd on the team in touchdowns type of volume. And Green Bay is an offense that I am really high on, as I talked about with Jordan Love in the quarterback video. Colston Loveland, also a round 11 pick. Just sort through the noise. I know it's easy to look at the Chicago Bears and Colston Loveland and go, oh God, it's crowded here. Odunze, DJ Moore, Luther Burden, Colston Loveland. There's so much to sort through here, and we don't even know if Caleb Williams is good yet. But he's a top 10 pick at tight end. A top 10 pick at tight end is going to be on the field. I expect him to immediately supplant Cole Kmet and run the lion's share of routes. If he doesn't, and we see that in preseason usage, I'll probably cool off my exposure to him. But I do think that when we saw what Ben Johnson did with Sam LaPorta, we know what Caleb Williams is capable of doing because of how good of a prospect he was. Even if you're not super high on Caleb Williams, you got to admit that this is an excellent situation, and Ben Johnson's a great coach to get him there. How is a better prospect not going to do what Sam LaPorta did? Sam LaPorta was an early 2nd round pick and a good prospect, but not as nearly as good as Colston Loveland. So Loveland being in that role with top 10 draft capital, to me, just screams take the discount. People are only drafting him around 11 because they don't know what to do with him in ADP because of all the target competition. If the Bears traded DJ Moore, Colston Loveland would be a 7th round pick, legitimately. He would go up in 3-4 spots of ADP in terms of round, and I absolutely love Colston Loveland at his price, so I'm taking him a ton right now. Dalton Kincaid goes in round 12. Call me crazy, but I think you're still getting a guy who could be Josh Allen's number 1 or number 2 target. I know it sounds crazy because Dalton Kincaid has not been good through the first 2 years of his career, but it's not like he's been bad either. He's kind of just been okay, and as a third-year tight end, should we really be giving up on a guy who was a first-round pick, high team investment, and by the way, gets the routes, gets the usage, is used in the slot like a lot, is not an inline tight end. The underlying metrics for Dalton Kincaid are not excellent. It doesn't point you to the fact that he's an excellent player, but it does point you to the fact that his role is really good. And if he can earn the targets in said role, he would definitely be a huge, huge win at ADP because Allen's touchdown rate, Allen's pass volume probably regressing positively after a monster year for James Cook and Josh Allen rushing touchdowns in. I'm not done with Dalton Kincaid. I do think he still has a ceiling, and weeks 1 to 10 last year, when he was healthy, he actually was producing at a pretty decent level and getting about 6 targets a game. So I'm not giving up on this dude. I know he was a 5th round pick last year and he burned a lot of people, but I'm taking the discount. I'm taking the bounce back season on Dalton Kincaid. Tight ends generally take a little bit of time to develop, and he's entering just his 3rd season and could be the number 1 or number 2 target for Josh Allen, the reigning MVP. So Dallas Goedert, round 13 option, steady Eddie. I mean, you kind of know what you're getting here. He was a top 5 tight end in yards per out run last year, and I've long expressed that I think Philly should throw a lot more because Saquon's not nearly going to be commanding that level of volume like we saw last year, at least in my opinion. A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, they're all going to benefit from that. So for me, when you look at Dallas Goedert, I don't think he has a real top 3, top 4 ceiling necessarily, but I do think he can be tight end 7 in points per game, be an every week starter for you, and get you, across the finish line, especially as a round 13 pick. The rest of your team presumably would be filled out at that point in time. And the best way to play Dallas Goedert, in my opinion, is to draft an upside guy with him. You take Tyler Warren in round 11, you swing back around in round 13 and grab Dallas Goedert. If you don't want to start Warren right away, you could start Goedert for the first couple games of the season, or you can just play matchups between those two guys. Same goes for Kraft, same goes for Loveland, same goes for Kincaid. It's very possible that one of those younger guys isn't ready to go week 1, specifically the rookies, Warren and Loveland, and you can use Dallas Goedert in the meantime for the first couple games of the year until you see the rookies start to get the reps, start to get the targets, maybe look more comfortable as players. And that's how I like playing Dallas Goedert. He's also just excellent at best ball because of the offense that he plays in. Isaiah Likely, round 13, probably not even startable in managed leagues right away, but Likely could actually take over Mark Andrews' job, in my opinion. I think it's definitely within the range of outcomes. He's better in best ball for sure. Likely, if he were to start for the Ravens, let's say Andrews goes down with an injury in week 6 or something, Likely would be a 100% of your fab type of spend for people in redraft leagues because he is truly the best handcuff in fantasy at the tight end position. And not only that, he could actually win the job outright and could actually have a lot of good spike weeks without an injury to Mark Andrews. But there's like a 20% chance he hits without a Mark Andrews injury and like a 95% chance he hits with a Mark Andrews injury. So I'm definitely still targeting him, even if it looks a little bit muddy. Just draft a talented player because he's going to give you spike weeks in best ball and may even be usable and managed. And both him and Andrews are top 12, back end top 12 guys on a weekly basis, given how good this offense is, how efficient this offense is. Final guy of this tier, and then we can kind of speed through the final guys. Jake Ferguson, similar to Dallas Goedert, I just feel pretty good that he's going to be a top 7 to 12 tight end. I don't think he has a top 5 ceiling necessarily because George Pickens is there and CeeDee Lamb is there. Without an injury to those guys, I don't see him being much better than like 10 to 12 fantasy points per game. But volume-wise, efficiency-wise, the Cowboys are going to throw the ball like crazy. They have no good running backs. They've been a very efficient passing offense. Last time Dak was healthy, he was second in MVP voting in 2023. And Jake Ferguson was hurt all season long, like literally got hurt the first game of the year and was kind of trying to claw back from that injury the whole season. It didn't really work out. Tight end 10 in 2023, the last time he was fully healthy as well as just a second-year guy. And he's in a contract year this year. I'm expecting a nice bounce back at a Jake Ferguson. And similar to Dallas Goedert, if you want to take Tyler Warren in round 11, swing back around in round 13 and grab Jake Ferguson to play at the beginning of the year, boom, you just solved your tight end position without spending a top 10 round pick on anybody. So tight end 17 to 24, Nothing really interesting here. I'm just going to kind of breeze through this. Moral of this position to me is once Goddard, Likely, and Ferguson are off the board, I probably want to already have a tight end on my team. I don't want to punt necessarily to this range because I don't love all of these guys unless we're talking 3 tight end builds in best ball. None of them are super interesting to me. Kyle Pitts and Brenton Strange might just not be very good, but I guess technically they have upside, so I should mention that. Hunter Henry, sneakily a good fallback option if you do the whole, I'm going to take Colston Loveland, I need a fallback option for weeks 1 to 3 that I can play right at the beginning of the year. Hunter Henry's a good option for that in addition to Dallas Goedert and Jake Ferguson because he's got a top-tier young quarterback. He has no real target competition other than Stephon Diggs, and even Stephon Diggs coming off of a ACL tear might not be right at the beginning of the season. Kyle Williams and Trevion Henderson are both being rookies, so we don't necessarily know how much of an impact they'll make right away. Hunter Henry wouldn't shock me if through the first month of the season, he's like the tight end 6 in points per game. So if you have a Colston Loveland kind of waiting on the back burner, you can't start him yet, and you have Hunter Henry, you can probably play Henry for the first couple games, and then as Loveland's routes go up, as his reps get better, you could probably throw him into your lineup beyond that. Jonnu Smith was a good pick for the Miami Dolphins before he got traded, but now he's buried down the depth chart with Pat Freiermuth. I expect them to use a lot of 2 tight ends, but I don't think that you'll feel comfortable in a managed format starting Jonnu Smith or Pat Freiermuth for the Steelers, so they're kind of both nuked out of here. Mike Gesicki doesn't have the routes or the target upside, given that Chase and Higgins command as much as they do, but he does have some intrigue if either of those guys were to go down. Zach Ertz, also a steady, streamable guy, very similar to Hunter Henry, and Cade Otton, kind of the same thing. All of those guys play in pretty good offenses. Both guys, specifically Ertz and Otton, have shown touchdown upside when given opportunities and an ability that if you just need 6 for 50, Cade Otton or Zach Ertz can get you that, especially in PPR tight end premium formats. That's a very good, cheap option that you can use. And then Mason Taylor is the final guy of this territory. The best upside swing in this range for sure, because the LSU tight end, high second round pick, rookie tight end, great athlete. We don't really know how good he is because he's a rookie, but there's no competition for targets there other than Garrett Wilson at wide receiver and Breece Hall out of the backfield. He's going to start just like Tyler Warren day one. No tight end is giving him a run for his money in terms of routes, snaps, targets, whatever. And I do think that if you really wanted to punt the tight end position into oblivion, taking Hunter Henry in round 14 and Mason Taylor in round 15 is not the worst idea, especially if you're going to build like those 2 guys plus a Cade Otton or a Theo Johnson or something for a 3 tight end build on Underdog for a full punt. I do think that's not that bad. I think you could actually get by in best ball with a situation like that. Tight ends 25 to 32, not a whole lot interesting here. Darren Waller, let's see how he looks in the Dolphins offense, because the role that Jonnu vacates was good enough for tight end 4 in points per game last year. Not that I think Darren Waller is going to be that good, but I do think in best ball or in managed leagues, if you wanted to pick him up for a speculative ad, he's not a bad option. JT Sanders, Theo Johnson, and Terrence Ferguson are the only guys that I'm really interested in here because they're second year and rookie tight ends. JT Sanders starts earning routes and then gets injured with a neck injury last year for the Panthers, so we didn't really get to see how his rookie season would have ended. Theo Johnson was actually a top 11 tight end in route participation as a rookie, and from week 3 onward, he was up there with Jonnu Smith, with David Njoku, with Sam LaPorta, with George Kittle, with like 80% of his team's routes. So he actually carved out a starting role last year. He's extremely athletic. Russ and the Giants probably going to be throwing a lot, especially because they're not going to be a very good team. And he could definitely carve out the number 2 role behind Malik Neighbors. And I don't know if any of us expect Wandale to have 140 targets again, but if he doesn't, there's a good chance that Theo Johnson takes away some of that work over the middle. And then Terrence Ferguson for the Rams, my second highest roster tight end behind Tyler Warren on Underdog right now. The drum beat's about to get loud. Part of why I've been drafting him is because I think he's going to get more expensive in drafts. The Rams loved him. They almost took him in the first round, according to Les Snead and Sean McVay and some of the interviews that they did after the draft. This team is going to be elite on offense. Matthew Stafford, Puka Nacua, and Devontae Adams, they are projected for the 4th most points according to Vegas. The pass volume is supposed to be high too, from a great quarterback who I actually laid some coin down to win MVP this year. And the number 1 and number 2 is not in the cards for Terrence Ferguson without an injury to Puka and Adams, who have missed time in the past. But you can be the number 3 target in a really, really good offense and be tight end 6 in points per game as a rookie. So for me, Terrence Ferguson, also one of my favorite upside swings late in Underdog drafts, and then maybe a 15th round dart throw from a redraft perspective, or just waiver wire speed dial for him there. So the scorecard Outlining my targets and my strategy at the position, as you can see, the top 16 tight ends are much better than the bottom 16 tight ends. This looks a little different than last year. You guys might think, oh, this is probably what it looks like every year. No, last year, the top 11 tight ends were clearly better than the rest of the tight end position, whereas it goes to 16 this year, which is why I think this is a good year to potentially punt off the tight end position. Last year, I stood here and I said these exact words. Route 1, I want to get one of the early guys. Kelce, McBride, Pitts, Kincaid. Those were my favorite targets. Failing that, I wanted Bowers, and Njoku, or Ferguson. That's exactly what I said to you guys last year. Decent hit rate. Some of those guys hit. Some of those guys hit big. A couple of them missed, but for the most part, I would say that was generally decent. This year, while getting an early tight end, like Bowers, like McBride, can definitely be super advantageous to you, I think that the three guys at the top are all so similar that I would rather just take Kittle in the 4th round than take McBride or Bowers in round 2 or 3. So for me, I'm not necessarily deviating for one of those top end tight ends. I would actually rather, if you're going to take a onesie in round 3, I would rather take Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson than I would Trey McBride or Brock Bowers if he slid there. And then in round 4, those quarterbacks are off the board. So let's say you started your draft with 2 running backs, 1 wide receiver, and all the top 4 quarterbacks are off the board at the 406 or something. Then yes, George Kittle makes a lot of sense there. Sam LaPorta, TJ Hockenson, Travis Kelce, those like middle round tight ends all the way to Engram to the like round 5 to round 9 range. I'm not really drafting those guys. And it's not because I don't think that they're decent projections. It's just that I like the running backs and wide receiver projections better. And I think that there's not a huge difference between Sam LaPorta at tight end 4 and Tyler Warren at tight end 9 or whatever he is off the board 50, 60 picks later in ADP. So that's where I'm at with that position group. My number 1 tight end strategy, I've made reference to it throughout this video, is I am not opposed to grabbing 2 tight ends in managed leagues too, not just best ball. I'm saying managed leagues. If you draft Tyler Warren, Colston Loveland, Dalton Kincaid, Tucker Kraft, some young tight end with a lot of upside, and then handcuff them a little bit with Dallas Goedert, Jake Ferguson, Hunter Henry, Zach Ertz, somebody who can get you by at the beginning of the season, play matchups for the first couple of weeks, and then see what happens. Maybe your young guy hit, maybe your young guy didn't hit. You roll with the older guy if he hits, and stream the waiver wire. Like, this is the position I'm ignoring. Like, let's just put it full stop here. Running backs, wide receivers, shallow this year after the top 30, 40 names at wide receiver and then the top 25, 30 names at running back. I want 7, 8 guys on my team from that territory. Quarterback, unless you're getting a great deal on the top 4, mobile quarterbacks, I'm probably fading that position as well. But tight end is the position I'm fading the most because, like I said, I feel very comfortable going into a season with Tyler Warren and Jake Ferguson as my 2 tight ends and figuring it out from there. I feel comfortable going Hunter Henry and Dalton Kincaid with my first 2 tight ends and figuring it out from there. So this, in my opinion, is the optimal way to play the tight end position in redraft this year. If I'm going to take a round 2 to 4 swing, it is going to be on Allen, Lamar, Daniels, or Hurts at the onesie positions. It is not going to be for Trey McBride or Brock Bowers or even potentially George Kittle unless he falls, because he is the cheapest, and I do actually really like his projection just as much as Bowers and McBride. Remember, though, the shallower your league is. You guys, I don't play in shallow leagues, right? I play best ball. I play 2 wide receiver, 2 flex, full PPR, those kind of league formats. If you guys play in bog standard leagues, half PPR leagues, 1 quarterback, 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, 1 flex, 1 tight end, these elite tight ends are going to be more valuable. They are going to be. It's just reality because they're a bigger percentage of your team's starting lineup. But even still, I still think that the Warren-Ferguson combination or the Loveland-Goddard combination is still a viable way to get ceiling at your tight end spot without spending the draft capital necessary to get said ceiling. So the person who takes LaPorta to Engram, tight end 4 to 8 in ADP, is probably going to be in the same position you are with those 2 guys. So for me, it's still the best way to play it, even in shallow league formats. But I'm more likely to click the button on McBride, Bowers, or Kittle in those type of formats because they mean more in shallower formats than they do in deeper formats. And then for those of you guys drafting on Underdog, 3 tight end builds are king this year, in my opinion. There is lots of data pointing to the variance of the tight end position. Again, 30 of the top 51 tight end weeks last year came from tight ends 9 and onward in ADP in 2024. You do not have to get George Kittle to get a high weekly ceiling. You can get a high weekly ceiling out of Tyler Warren, out of Dallas Goedert, out of Cade Otton. Like, there's guys that give you big tight end weeks, even despite not having an ADP, a high ADP. My favorite way to play a 3 tight end build on Underdog is grab a premier upside guy, Warren, Loveland, Njoku, Kraft, Kincaid, somebody like that. Pair them with a safe projection, Goddard, Ferguson, Hunter Henry, Ertz, Cade Otton, somebody like that. And then grab another late round upside guy, Mason Taylor, Darren Waller, JT Sanders, Theo Johnson, or Terrence Ferguson. And boom, you have 3 tight end builds like the one that you guys can see on this team here. This is a team that I drafted in the $500 big dog. 8 of my first 9 picks went to running back and wide receiver. I grabbed 2 quarterbacks in the low double-digit rounds, and then I did a 3 tight end build with 2 upside guys like Kraft and Noah Gray, 1 safe guy like Cade Otton, and 2 solid quarterbacks. So that is how I'm playing the tight end position. If you guys want to take advantage of some of this advice right away, head on over to Underdog Fantasy. Use the promo code FSE when you sign up and start building some 3 tight end teams. Start getting some draft practice, legitimate. If you guys are just coming back to the fantasy season, because unlike me, you actually have lives, and when the fantasy football season's not going on, you're not paying attention to fantasy football. To get back into the rhythm, get back into, okay, this is where these guys are going in ADP, head on over to Underdog Fantasy and draft as many teams as your budget can allow you to. Because if you want to be prepared to beat your league mates, you want to have real money drafts with real sharp ADP under your belt, especially if your league format rivals the format on Underdog. It's a 3 wide receiver league. Wide receivers are pushed up the board. You are going to be over prepared for your home league drafts. And you can, again, sign up on Underdog, use the promo code FSE, sign up using that promo code to get up to $1,000 in bonus cash, 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Do some of the drafts that are in the lobby right now. They have drafts for every price point. $3 drafts, $5 drafts, $10 drafts, $25 drafts, all the way up to $500 drafts like the one that I showed you there. If you guys are interested in signing up, the link will be down below for that in the pinned comment. And of course, be staying tuned to the running backs and wide receiver league winners videos coming in the next 2 weeks. Those are going to be really, really important to determine which guys we're going after, what pockets of the draft we're attacking. Quarterback and tight end I did first because I wanted to establish that it's a good year to only deviate for like one of the onesies. And usually that will be elite quarterbacks in the third, fourth round. But it also is a great year to hammer the crap out of running backs and wide receivers early. So that is why we are doing this all in totality. And of course, on August 11th, that will culminate in the #1 draft strategy for 2025 fantasy football drafts, plus a PPR mock draft, the video I do every single year. So stay tuned for all of that. Like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed. If you are new around here, please hit the subscribe button. We will have you covered to beat your league mates in your fantasy football drafts. And if you want to check out all of our rankings, those are on flockfantasy.com. Promo code FSE, our draft guide, edition 1 is coming out tomorrow. You guys are going to not want to miss that. So definitely check that out if you're interested. But with that being said, peace out, and I'll talk to you soon.